The phone rang at exactly 3:03 a.m., shattering the fragile silence of my Paris apartment. I jolted awake, heart hammering, fumbling in the darkness. On the screen, Chloe's name flashed like a warning. My sister never called, especially not at this hour. I answered on the third ring, my voice thick with sleep. Chloe? A raw, broken sob exploded through the line, snapping me fully awake. Sophie, it's Dad, she gasped between tears. He had a heart attack. They don't think he's going to make it. My mind blanked. For a moment, I simply sat there, frozen, unable to comprehend the words spilling from her. What? When? Where is he? I choked out, flinging off the covers. Hartford Medical. Mom's there with him. Nathan, too. But he was asking for you before they took him into surgery. Chloe's voice cracked completely, dissolving into wretched crying. You need to come home. Please, Sophie, come home. I was already moving, the cold wooden floor stinging my bare feet as I stumbled toward the closet. I'm coming, I promised, grabbing the first clothes I could find and throwing them into a half-empty suitcase. The zipper stuck, my hands trembling, so badly I had to yank it free with a curse. 10 minutes later, I was racing down the narrow streets toward Charles de Gaulle Airport, the early morning fog blurring the world into indistinct shapes. Flights to the U.S. were limited at this hour, but I didn't care. I would pay anything, do anything to get back. By some miracle, I secured the last seat on a flight to New York, a business-class ticket that devoured the remains of my savings without a second thought. As I handed over my passport and boarding pass, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Mrs. Langston, our old neighbor in Vermont. Just 2 words. Be careful. I frowned, heart twisting tighter, but there was no time to dwell on it. Not now. The hours that followed blurred into a nightmare of stale airport air, overpriced coffee, and the constant throb of dread in my chest. Every time the gate agents called a boarding announcement, I half expected them to summon me over the loudspeaker and deliver the final blow. Somewhere over the Atlantic, staring at the tiny screen on the seat in front of me, I allowed myself a single thought. What if I was too late? Images flooded my mind. The last Christmas I'd spent in Asbury, Dad laughing as he carved the turkey, his warm hand squeezing my shoulder, telling me how proud he was that I'd chased my dreams in Paris. Even now, the sound of his voice could break me. I clutched the small locket around my neck, a gift from him on my 21st birthday, feeling its cool weight against my skin. I'm coming. Dad, I whispered under my breath. Just hold on. When we finally touched down at JFK, the cold March air sliced through my thin coat as I raced for my connection. Vermont felt a world away, and yet somehow, as the plane lifted into the pale winter sky, dread pooled deeper in my stomach. The closer I got to home, the heavier the feeling grew. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, but it was too late to turn back. By the time we descended over the snowy fields of Vermont, my heart was a raw, ragged thing barely holding together. Nathan would be waiting at the airport, Chloe had said. He would drive me straight to the hospital. I clung to that plan like a lifeline, forcing myself to believe in it, because the alternative, the idea that something even worse was waiting for me, was simply too much to bear. As the wheels touched the runway, I exhaled shakily, gripping the armrest until my knuckles whitened. Just get to Dad, I muttered under my breath. Just get to Dad. I had no idea that by the end of that day, the man I thought I knew, the family I had trusted, and everything I believed about love and loyalty would be shattered beyond repair. Nathan was already waiting at the gate, standing stiffly near the baggage carousel with his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his coat. He looked just as I remembered, tall, athletic, with that effortless New England preppiness my mother had always praised. But there was something different, too. His face was tight, pale, and when he spotted me, the smile he forced onto his lips didn't reach his eyes. "Sophie," he said, pulling me into a hug that was all hard arms and no warmth. I stiffened instinctively, catching the sharp scent of his aftershave and something else underneath. Nerves. I'm so glad you made it. How's Dad? I demanded, pulling back to study his face. His gaze flickered, just for a fraction of a second, but I caught it. It's touch and go, Nathan said, grabbing my suitcase and steering me toward the exit almost too quickly. They're doing everything they can. Mom's with him. Chloe too. Everyone's just been devastated. His voice cracked slightly, but it sounded wrong, rehearsed. I want to go straight to the hospital, I said, quickening my pace. Nathan hesitated. Actually, Mom was hoping you could stop by the house first. Freshen up. Change. You've had a long flight. The whole family's gathering there. It'll mean a lot to everyone to see you. I stopped in my tracks, blinking at him. Nathan, is he stable? I mean, why wouldn't we go straight to see him if it's that serious? He shifted, avoiding my eyes, before pasting that brittle smile back on. Of course we'll go. Just, you know how Mom gets. She wants you to look your best. For Dad. The explanation made my stomach twist uncomfortably. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense, but arguing in the middle of the terminal wouldn't change anything. Reluctantly, I followed him to the parking lot, the Vermont air sharp and biting against my skin. Nathan's SUV gleamed under the weak winter sun, newer than the last one I remembered. As he loaded my suitcase into the back, I glanced around, feeling strangely disconnected from everything. It had been 5 years since I last set foot in Asbury, and already the place felt off. The drive home took longer than it should have. Nathan took the scenic route, winding through back roads lined with skeletal trees and frozen fields. I stared out the window, catching glimpses of change, new developments, glossy storefronts, subdivisions that hadn't existed before. Notably, many of them bore a familiar logo, Aldridge Property Group. You guys have been busy, I remarked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Nathan chuckled dryly. Dad's vision, expanding the family legacy. You know how he is. Must have taken a lot of investment, I said casually, watching his knuckles whiten against the steering wheel. Yeah, well, we had some supportive backers. People who believe in us. His voice was clipped defensive. I said nothing, but the unease that had been coiling in my gut since Paris tightened further. Something was wrong. Not just wrong, rotten. When we finally pulled into the long gravel driveway of the Aldridge family estate, my heart sank further. The house itself hadn't changed, still the grand colonial-style mansion with white columns and dark shutters, but the driveway was packed with cars. Expensive ones. Too expensive. One vehicle caught my eye immediately. A sleek silver Mercedes that I knew belonged to Philip Hartman, the Aldridge family's longtime attorney. My breath hitched. Why was Philip here? And why now? Nathan, I said slowly, what's going on? Why is Philip at the house? Just family stuff, he muttered, slamming the car door harder than necessary. Let's go inside first. Then we'll head to the hospital. No, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I want to see Dad. Now. Nathan froze for a beat, then forced another strained smile. Of course. We'll just check in with Mom first. She's been waiting for you. Against every instinct screaming at me to turn around, to run, I followed him up the steps. The heavy front door swung open before he even reached for the knob, and there was my mother, Meredith Aldridge, looking as polished as ever in a cashmere sweater and pearls, her makeup impeccable, her smile brittle around the edges. Sophie, darling, she said, reaching for me with outstretched arms. You're finally home. Home. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I didn't return my mother's embrace. I stood stiff, cold, my arms at my sides. Her perfume, something floral and heavy, clung to the air between us, suffocating. She withdrew after a beat, her smile faltering just a fraction before snapping back into place. We're all so relieved you made it, she said, smoothing the front of her sweater. It's been difficult. I want to see Dad, I said immediately, my voice sharper than I intended. Now, Meredith and Nathan exchanged a glance. It was quick, practiced, but I caught it the silent conversation passing between them like a spark. "Of course," Nathan said hurriedly. "Of course. Let's get your things inside first, and—" "No," I interrupted, stepping back. "Take me to the hospital. Right now." A tense silence stretched between us. I watched their carefully composed faces slip, the masks they wore every day for the benefit of Asbury society starting to crack. Nathan cleared his throat. "The car's still running," he said, shooting Mom a look that I wasn't supposed to notice. "We'll head over." He grabbed the keys again, and we returned to the SUV without another word. As we pulled out of the driveway, I caught one last glimpse of the scene inside the house. A cluster of relatives, huddled around laptops and stacks of papers, their faces lit by the cold glow of spreadsheets and contracts. Not a prayer circle. Not a vigil. Business. My hands clenched into fists in my lap. The drive to Hartford General was suffocating. Nathan gripped the steering wheel like it might fly away if he let go. I stared straight ahead, the silence between us thick and unnatural. When we finally pulled into the hospital parking lot, Nathan moved with the air of someone who knew exactly where he was going. Too exactly. He led me through the main doors, past the check-in desk, straight toward the elevators without so much as glancing at the signage. I followed, dread curdling in my stomach. On the cardiac care floor, Nathan approached the nurse's station with a confidence that rang false. "Hi," he said. "We're here for Richard Aldridge. Room 417. The charge nurse, a woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, frowned slightly, typing into her computer. She shook her head. "I'm sorry," she said. "We don't have a patient by that name." Nathan stiffened. There must be a mistake. He was admitted yesterday. Heart attack. The nurse's frown deepened. "I've been here since yesterday morning. We haven't admitted anyone named Aldridge. And room 417 has been empty since Tuesday." The world tilted. For a moment, I thought I might actually black out. I turned slowly toward Nathan, whose face had gone sheet white. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice shaking with fury. "Nathan, tell me right now." He opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed hard. Maybe they moved him to another hospital. "Liar," I said, so loudly the heads in the waiting area turned. "You're lying to me." I stepped back, putting space between us. The walls of the hospital seemed to close in around me, the fluorescent lights buzzing louder, the floor swaying under my feet. "Let's just go back to the house," Nathan said quickly, his voice low and urgent. "We'll explain everything there." I didn't move. I stared at him. This man I had once looked up to, who used to teach me how to ride a bike and fix a flat tire, now reduced to a stammering stranger. "You faked it," I said numbly. "You faked Dad's heart attack to bring me back." Nathan reached for me, but I jerked away. "Don't touch me," I hissed. "I swear, if you try to lie to me again, I'll scream this entire hospital down." For a second, I thought he might drag me out by force. Then his shoulders sagged, defeat leaking out of him like air from a punctured balloon. "Dad's fine," he muttered. "He's at home. It was just a scare, a minor one." I laughed, a harsh, broken sound that echoed down the sterile hallway. "You lied," I said again, because I couldn't seem to stop myself. "You made me think he was dying." "I'm sorry," Nathan said, but the words were hollow, meaningless. "We needed you home, sophomore. It's important. Family is important. Family." I pushed past him, my chest heaving, my vision blurring. I didn't know what was waiting for me back at that house, but whatever it wasn't love. It wasn't family. It was something far, far worse. The ride back to the house was a slow, suffocating crawl. Nathan didn't speak, and neither did I. The tension in the car was so thick it felt like a physical thing, pressing against my ribs, making it hard to breathe. I stared out the window, fists clenched, watching the winter landscape blur past. I couldn't stop replaying the conversation at the hospital, the lies, the betrayal, the dawning horror that the family I had clung to across continents and oceans had lured me back under false pretenses. When we pulled into the driveway again, I didn't wait for Nathan to park properly. I unbuckled, shoved the door open, and strode up the porch steps, my boots striking the wood hard enough to echo. The front door swung open before I could touch the handle. Meredith stood there, perfectly composed as ever. Behind her, the house buzzed with energy, but not the frantic, morning kind. No, this was something else entirely. The low murmur of voices, the clatter of coffee cups, the shuffle of papers being moved hastily. Business, deals, strategies. My stomach twisted tighter. Sophie, my mother said, her voice syrupy sweet, let's sit down. You must be exhausted after such a long journey. I want the truth, I snapped. Right now. The dining room looked like a war room. Philip Hartman was seated at the head of the table. A spread of documents and contracts fanned out before him, like a general preparing for battle. Chloe sat nearby, no longer tear-streaked, calmly sipping a latte from a porcelain cup. A few other relatives, cousins, uncles, names I hadn't heard in years, hovered along the edges, avoiding my gaze. And then there was Dad. Richard Aldridge stood by the window, perfectly healthy, swirling a glass of brandy in one hand, gazing out at the snow-dusted lawn as if he hadn't just been pronounced at death's door the night before. He turned when he heard my footsteps. His face split into a practiced smile. "Sweetheart," he said warmly, stepping toward me. "You're home." I flinched back before he could touch me. The smile faltered. "Don't," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "Don't you dare." A heavy silence fell over the room. "Sophie, please," my mother began, smoothing the front of her sweater as she always did when uncomfortable. "We can explain everything." "Explain?" I barked a bitter laugh. "Explain how you lied about Dad dying to drag me back across the world? Explain how you used my love for him as bait?" Philip cleared his throat delicately. "Perhaps we should all sit." "I'm not sitting," I snapped. "Not until someone tells me why you faked a medical emergency." The room shifted. Eyes darted away. Feet shuffled. Finally, it was Dad who spoke, voice calm, reasonable, like he was explaining something to a child. "There's a situation, Sophie," he said, "with the company. Some financial difficulties. We need to make some strategic decisions to preserve the Aldridge legacy." I stared at him, incredulous. "And that required lying to me, making me think you were on your deathbed." We couldn't discuss it over the phone. Meredith interjected quickly. "It's too important." The pieces snapped together then, the urgent calls, the gathering of family, the lawyer already waiting, and my birthday looming just 3 weeks away. "You didn't bring me home because you missed me," I said slowly. "You brought me home because of the inheritance." No one answered. They didn't have to. "You want my trust fund," I said, feeling the final betrayal slot into place like a dagger between my ribs. "Grandpa Frederick's money. The trust that matures when I turn 30. Dad spread his hands, as if that made it reasonable. "It's not about the money, Sophie. It's about the future. The company is the family's future. Your future." "My future," I repeated flatly. "You mean your lifeboat." Chloe set down her coffee cup with a soft clink. "We're family, Sophie," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "We stick together." Family. That word again. Twisted and warped beyond recognition. I looked around at the faces that had once been my world. The smiling liars, the cold manipulators, the people who thought they could summon me back like a trained dog when it suited them. I thought of Paris, of the tiny apartment I had fought so hard to afford, of the designs that bore my name, of the life I had built with my own hands. They didn't want me. They wanted what I could give them, and they were about to find out exactly who they were dealing with. Dinner that night was a grotesque parody of normalcy. Meredith had made pot roast, my favorite when I was a child, and the smell filled the house with a warmth that felt counterfeit now. The dining table was set with the good china, crystal glasses winking under the chandelier's glow. Everyone played their part, smiling, passing dishes, asking hollow questions about Paris, my career, my plans for the future, as if they hadn't just ripped away any illusion of trust between us. I barely tasted the food. Each bite turned to ash in my mouth. I answered their questions in clipped, polite phrases, keeping my anger tightly bottled under a mask of cool civility. Across the table, Dad nodded approvingly, like a general watching a soldier fall back into line. When the plates were cleared, Richard rose, swirling the last of his brandy in the glass. "Tomorrow," he announced, "Philip will walk you through some opportunities with the company. Exciting prospects. With your help, Sophie, we can ensure the Aldridge legacy for generations to come." I forced a smile, my face aching with the effort. "I look forward to it," I lied smoothly. Their relief was palpable, filling the room like smoke. They thought they had me, but the night was far from over. Feigning exhaustion and jet lag, I excused myself early, climbing the stairs to my childhood bedroom. The moment I closed the door, I dropped the facade, leaning heavily against it, heart pounding. The room was almost unnervingly unchanged, posters peeling from the walls, an old quilt folded neatly at the foot of the bed, like a shrine to the girl I used to be, the girl they thought had returned, obedient and naive. At 8:45 p.m., I slipped out the back door. The walk to Pete's Diner was short, but each step felt like a rebellion. The cold night air bit at my cheeks, and my breath fogged in front of me. Neon lights buzzed softly above the diner entrance, casting a sickly glow onto the cracked pavement. Inside, Mrs. Langston waited in a corner booth, a pot of tea steaming between her gnarled hands. She looked up as the door jingled, her sharp blue eyes softening when she saw me. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said as I slid into the booth. "I almost didn't," I admitted, shrugging off my coat. "But I need answers." The waitress approached, and I ordered a coffee, waiting until she was out of earshot before leaning in. "They lied to me," I said in a low voice. "About everything. Dad's fine. They faked it to get me home." Mrs. Langston nodded grimly. "I suspected as much." "Why?" I demanded. "Why would they go that far?" She took a long sip of her tea, then set the cup down with a soft clink. "Because they're drowning, Sophie, and they see you as the last rope." She reached into her oversized handbag and pulled out a folded newspaper, sliding it across the table. It was the business section from a few months back. A small headline caught my eye. "Aldridge Property Group faces investor lawsuit, Lakeside Development halted." My stomach dropped. "They expanded too fast," Mrs. Langston said quietly. "Took on too many projects. Leveraged everything they had, and some things they didn't." I thought of the gleaming new developments, the empty storefronts, the forced smiles. They needed constant new investments to stay afloat, she continued, her voice low and steady. When that dried up, they turned to other sources, shadier ones, private lenders, offshore accounts, shell companies. "And now," I said, voice hollow, "they want my inheritance to plug the holes." Bingo! The waitress returned with my coffee. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, needing the grounding sensation. "It's worse than just bad business decisions, Sophie," Mrs. Langston said after a beat. "If even half the rumors are true, they're facing more than bankruptcy. We're talking fraud, wire fraud, securities violations, maybe even money laundering." I stared down into my coffee, the black liquid trembling slightly in my hands. Everything was unraveling faster than I could process. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Langston's eyes softened. "Because your grandfather was my friend. Frederick trusted you to be the one who broke the cycle. He knew this day might come." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat threatening to choke me. "So," she said, her voice steady, "the question is, are you going to let them sink you too?" I looked out the diner window, the darkened streets of Ashaberry stretching endlessly ahead. Somewhere in that darkness, my family waited, sharpening their knives, cloaked in smiles. And for the first time since I stepped off that plane, I knew exactly what I had to do. The next morning, I played my part perfectly. I descended the grand staircase wearing a soft sweater and jeans, casual, approachable, non-threatening. My hair was brushed into loose waves, my makeup natural. I looked every inch the prodigal daughter returned home, ready to fall back into the family fold, and they ate it up. Mom smiled warmly as she slid a plate of pancakes in front of me. Dad clapped a hand on my shoulder, squeezing just a bit too hard. Nathan poured me coffee, like we were all just a happy, normal family. Even Chloe was chipper, chatting about the weather and local gossip as if the previous night's confrontation had never happened. I smiled back. I laughed at the right moments. I asked careful, leading questions. They thought I was weakening. But every word they said, every glance exchanged, every careless slip, they were all weapons I was gathering, storing, sharpening. After breakfast, Philip Hartman arrived with his ever-present briefcase. He looked tired, sweat beading along his hairline despite the cold. I wondered if he realized yet just how much trouble he was in. Dad gathered everyone into the dining room again. The same contracts from last night were spread neatly across the polished mahogany table, this time joined by glossy presentation folders stamped with the Aldridge Property Group logo. Philip launched into a rehearsed speech about exciting growth opportunities, temporary liquidity challenges, and family solidarity. His words were slick, practiced, but I caught the tremor in his hands as he flipped through the documents. When he slid a thick packet toward me, I placed my hand lightly atop it, smiling sweetly. I'd like to review everything carefully before I sign anything, I said, just to be thorough. Dad exchanged a glance with Philip, something tense flickering between them. Of course, sweetheart, Dad said after a beat, his voice overly jovial. We want you to feel completely comfortable. Take all the time you need, Philip added, though the tightness around his mouth said otherwise. I gathered the documents carefully, sliding them into a leather folder. Maybe a tour later? I suggested brightly. I'd love to see all these new developments everyone's so excited about. Nathan jumped at the bait. Absolutely. I'll show you around this afternoon. You'll see, it's impressive. I smiled wider. I can't wait. They thought I was coming around, that the beautiful, foolish daughter they remembered had finally seen reason. But as I excused myself and climbed back up to my old bedroom, I locked the door behind me and pulled out my phone. One by one, I photographed every page of the contracts, uploading them to a secure cloud account. I scanned through the legal jargon, feeling bile rise in my throat. The documents were a trap. If I signed my entire inheritance, $8.2 million in liquid assets and real estate, would be transferred directly into Aldridge Property Group. I would receive a minority partnership interest, a meaningless title with no voting power, subject to dilution at the discretion of the board, a board controlled entirely by Dad and Nathan. In other words, they would own everything. I would have nothing. It wasn't just greedy. It was calculated, ruthless, cold. I set the folder aside and opened another one, an old, worn yearbook from high school, where I had hidden a letter from Grandpa Frederick long ago. His familiar scrawl stared back at me, the word simple but heavy with meaning. Trust your instincts, Sophie, especially when it comes to family. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in deeply, letting the weight of everything settle. This wasn't just about protecting my inheritance anymore. It was about protecting the future my grandfather had fought to give me. It was about stopping the rot that had spread through the Aldridge name before it devoured anyone else. And for that, I needed more than just documents. I needed witnesses, evidence, proof. When Nathan knocked on my door an hour later, cheerfully announcing that it was time for our tour, I pasted a bright, eager smile onto my face and walked straight into enemy territory. Nathan was in high spirits as we pulled out of the driveway, chattering away like a proud tour guide. I let him ramble, nodding politely, my eyes fixed on the snowy landscape blurring past. He thought this was a formality, a victory lap before I signed away my future. The first stop was a development called Lakeside Estates, proudly branded with the Aldridge Property Group logo on a weather-beaten sign. According to Nathan, it was supposed to be a premier luxury housing community. The reality was less inspiring. Half-finished houses stood in skeletal rows, their frames exposed to the biting winter air. Piles of unused materials were scattered across muddy lots. There was no construction equipment, no workers, no signs of life at all. Nathan waved his hand dismissively. Just a small hiccup with permits. Nothing unusual. We'll be back on track soon. I smiled, pretending to believe him, but inside, my suspicions hardened into certainty. The next stop was a retail complex, Asbury Crossing. It looked promising from a distance, all sleek glass and steel, until we got closer. The anchor store, a big box retailer, had pulled out. Most of the other storefronts sat empty, plastered with for lease signs that flapped weakly in the wind. Finalizing contracts with new tenants, Nathan said too quickly. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, the skin across his knuckles stretching white. I leaned back in my seat, feigning casual interest. These projects must have cost a fortune, I mused. You must have some really patient investors. There was a beat of silence too long to be innocent. Nathan forced a laugh. Well, in business, there's always a little risk involved. You just have to keep moving forward. I turned my head to look out the window, hiding my expression. Keep moving forward, even if it meant burying everyone else along the way. The final stop was the Lakeshore Towers, a gleaming office complex meant to revitalize the downtown economy, according to Nathan's enthusiastic spiel. The building's frame was complete, but the windows were dark, the parking lot deserted except for a few piles of dirty snow. We didn't even get out of the car. Redesigning the interior layouts, Nathan said lamely, to better suit tenant needs. I nodded, noting every lie, every half-truth, every gaping hole where millions of dollars had disappeared. As we drove back toward the estate, Nathan grew more relaxed, mistaking my silence for acquiescence. He started talking about future projects, expansion plans, even casually mentioning a few private investors who had stepped in to cover shortfalls. The words slid off his tongue easily, too easily. I asked one careful question after another, wrapping my voice in wide-eyed innocence, letting him brag and boast and confess without even realizing it. By the time we pulled into the driveway again, I had enough to confirm what Mrs. Langston had hinted at, and more. The Aldrich Property Group wasn't just failing. It was a rotting carcass dressed up in borrowed silk, held together by loans from increasingly desperate, increasingly dangerous sources. As Nathan bounded inside, calling for Mom to start dinner preparations, I lingered in the car, my hands trembling slightly as I pulled out my phone. I opened the voice recording app, saving the entire drive's conversation into my secure cloud folder. Connecticut was a one-party consent state for recording conversations, and I intended to use every advantage I had. Upstairs in my old bedroom, I typed furiously into a hidden document on my laptop, compiling everything. Unfinished developments, missing tenants, shady investors, Nathan's admissions. Piece by piece, the noose tightened. Tomorrow, Bernard would return with the final papers. They would expect me to sign. They would think I had fallen back into line. But when the sun rose over Asbury, it would not be the start of a new chapter for the Aldrich family. It would be the beginning of their end. That night, as the house finally slipped into uneasy silence, I moved like a ghost through the familiar halls. Every creaky floorboard, every faded family photo on the walls, it all felt like a set piece, a crumbling stage for the final act. I locked my door, shoved a chair under the handle for good measure, and opened my laptop. My hands moved quickly, methodically, fueled by adrenaline and cold determination. First, I uploaded the recordings from the car ride to the secure cloud folder I had created, the same folder now bursting with contracts, emails, photos, and financial documents I had quietly gathered over the past 48 hours. Then I drafted an encrypted email to Kayla Morgan, my old friend who now worked for the Vermont State Financial Crimes Unit. I kept it brief and clinical. Subject: urgent, potential financial fraud, Aldrich Property Group. Evidence, folder attached. Recommend coordination with SEC, FBI, and state authorities. Immediate action necessary. I hit send before I could hesitate. Next, I contacted James Sullivan, my grandfather's former lawyer, the man who had crafted the ironclad trust that was now the only thing standing between me and complete financial ruin. James had been cautious when I first reached out, but once he understood the gravity of the situation, he moved swiftly. Now he confirmed receipt of the evidence and assured me that formal complaints had been filed, complaints timed to align perfectly with the family's stage signing ceremony tomorrow morning. If everything went according to plan, the moment I sat down at that table, the walls would start closing in. But I wasn't finished yet. At 2 a.m., under the cover of darkness, I met Margaret Langston at Pete's Diner one final time. She looked tired, her sharp eyes clouded with worry, but when I laid out the plan, her face hardened with resolve. "My nephew's ready," she said. "He's a private investigator. Been following your family's financial trail for months. Offshore accounts, fake companies, you name it. Is it enough?" I asked, the weight of the night pressing down on me. "It's more than enough," Margaret said grimly. "The only thing missing was someone brave enough to strike the match." I squeezed her hand across the table. "Thank you," I whispered. "You're doing the right thing, Sophie," she said, "no matter how much it hurts." It did hurt more than I cared to admit, but I had long since realized that clinging to a rotting ship only ensured you drowned with it. As I slipped back into the house just before dawn, the first threads of pale sunlight creeping across the floorboards, I felt a strange, hollow calm settle over me. Today would be the end, not just of Aldridge Property Group, but of the illusions that had bound me to this family long after they deserved my loyalty. At 7 a.m., the house was already stirring. I dressed carefully in the same charcoal pencil skirt and cream blouse I had worn to job interviews in Paris, the armor of a woman who knew her worth, who refused to be underestimated again. Downstairs, Meredith arranged pastries on the good china, her movements brisk, almost frantic. Nathan paced near the windows, tapping furiously at his phone. Chloe whispered to Philip in the corner, her face tight with tension. And Dad stood at the head of the table, surveying it all with the cold confidence of a man who believed he had won. He didn't even glance at me as I entered. "Bernard will be here shortly," he said to no one in particular. "Let's keep this professional." Professional, as if they hadn't spent weeks plotting to strip me of everything my grandfather had fought to protect. I folded my hands calmly on the back of a chair and waited. Waited for Bernard to arrive with the contracts. Waited for the knock at the door that would change everything. Waited for the carefully built empire of lies to come crashing down around them. And this time I wouldn't lift a single finger to save it. The clock on the mantel clicked steadily toward 9 a.m. The house felt stretched thin, every breath taut with anticipation. When Bernard Hartman finally arrived, the air shifted. He entered briskly, briefcase in hand, face set in an expression of manufactured calm. But his eyes darted too quickly around the room. He smelled the storm coming, even if he didn't understand its full force yet. "Good morning, everyone," Bernard said, setting his case on the dining table and flipping open the latches with a practiced snap. "Shall we begin?" Dad gestured magnanimously to the chair opposite him. "Sophie, darling, we've kept this as simple as possible for you." I took my seat slowly, smoothing my skirt, my heart a hammering drumbeat under my ribs. Around the table, Meredith smiled tightly. Chloe picked at a croissant. Nathan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed like a man certain of victory. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table, screen down. No one objected. They were too eager. Bernard slid a thick document across the table toward me. The transfer agreement, the final piece of their grand plan. "As we discussed," he said, tapping the packet with one stubby finger, "this document will transfer your assets directly from the trust to Aldridge Property Group in exchange for a minority partnership stake. Very standard, very secure. Would you mind walking me through it? I asked sweetly. For the record. Dad frowned slightly. Sophie, you've seen the documents, for the record, I repeated, my voice steel-wrapped in silk. Bernard hesitated, glancing at Dad. Dad nodded, impatient. And so Bernard began, explaining clause after clause, the rehearsed lies tumbling from his mouth. I listened, nodding occasionally, feigning the wide-eyed naivety they expected, while my phone's recorder captured every damning word. He was halfway through when the doorbell rang. Everyone stiffened. Dad looked irritated. Meredith rose automatically. I'll get it, she said. No need, I said, pushing my chair back smoothly. I've got it. I crossed the foyer, every step measured, deliberate. I opened the door. James Sullivan stood there, calm and solid, flanked by 2 men and 1 woman in dark suits. Behind them, a black SUV idled at the curb, its engine rumbling low, like a distant growl. James, I said, stepping aside. Please come in. The first agent flipped open his badge. Special Agent Rachel Monroe, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We have a warrant to search these premises and seize all financial documents related to Aldridge Property Group. For a heartbeat, the house was frozen in perfect stillness. Then chaos erupted. Bernard surged to his feet, clutching at his briefcase. Nathan swore, loudly, knocking over his chair. Meredith clutched the back of the dining room chair, her face draining of color. Chloe just stared, open-mouthed, a croissant half lifted to her lips. And Dad turned to me, his face contorting into something ugly and unrecognizable. What have you done? He hissed. I met his gaze steadily, the years of betrayal, manipulation, and conditional love falling away like ash in the wind. I protected what Grandpa Frederick left me, I said softly. And I protected this town from you. An agent moved toward Bernard, confiscating his documents before he could slip anything into his briefcase. Another pulled Nathan aside, beginning to question him. Dad moved toward me, fists clenched at his sides. You think you're some kind of hero. You've destroyed this family. No, I said calmly, stepping just out of reach. You destroyed it the moment you decided I was nothing more than a $sign. Behind him, agents fanned out through the house, disappearing into the study, the basement, the attic. Their radios crackled softly, the sound of a noose tightening. You'll regret this, Dad spat. We have connections. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Neither do you, I said, smiling grimly. Because this time I wasn't alone. I wasn't the frightened, desperate girl who had once begged for their approval. I was the storm they never saw coming, and they were already drowning. The living room had become a battlefield. Agents moved swiftly, collecting files, hard drives, anything that might hold evidence. The faint hum of printers, the crinkle of paper being sealed into evidence bags. It filled the silence left by my family's stunned collapse. Nathan was the first to lose it. You little traitor, he snarled across the room as an FBI agent gently but firmly cuffed his wrists. You think this makes you better than us? You think this makes you righteous? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. His words bounced off me like rain against a steel door. Meredith sat frozen at the dining table, her hands trembling in her lap, her pearl bracelet rattling faintly against the porcelain teacup she still clutched. She looked smaller somehow, deflated. Chloe tried to slip away quietly through the kitchen, but an agent intercepted her, leading her back with a firm hand on her shoulder. She didn't resist. She just sagged, her eyes hollow, her face pale under her carefully applied makeup. But it was Richard Aldridge, my father, who fought the hardest. This is a mistake, he barked at Agent Monroe, his face mottled with rage. You're ruining innocent lives. You're destroying a legitimate business. Do you know who I am? Agent Monroe didn't even flinch. Charles Richard Aldridge, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. The words rolled over him like a tide, inevitable and unstoppable. As they cuffed him, he twisted to look at me one last time, hatred burning in his eyes. "You're no daughter of mine," he spat. Something inside me twinged, the ghost of an old wound aching faintly, but it faded as quickly as it came. "No," I said, quietly. "I stopped being your daughter the moment you decided my love was a bargaining chip." The agents led him away, the front door swinging wide to reveal a line of black SUVs waiting to ferry them to holding. Nathan went next, still cursing under his breath. Meredith followed, silent, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood, like a funeral march. Chloe was last, glancing back over her shoulder once, her eyes meeting mine, but there was no plea for forgiveness there, only resignation. And just like that, they were gone. The house felt cavernous in their absence, echoing and hollow. James Sullivan approached, his face grave. "It's over," he said simply. I nodded, but I didn't move. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the enormity of it washing over me. Everything I had known, every bond one had once trusted, shattered. But strangely, there was no grief. Only a hard, clean clarity. I had lost a family today. But in truth, I had lost them a long time ago. Today, I had simply made it official. Margaret appeared in the doorway then, her coat dusted with snow, her eyes sharp and kind all at once. She walked to me without a word and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Sophie," she said. "Hard things, but right." I closed my eyes, letting her words settle into the aching spaces inside me. Maybe healing wouldn't come overnight. Maybe the scars would never fully fade. But for the first time in a very, very long time, I was free. The weeks that followed blurred into a haze of depositions, meetings with prosecutors, and endless hours combing through financial records. I worked closely with the authorities, providing every scrap of evidence I had gathered, every hidden account, every forged document, every lie they had built their empire on. The media had a field day. Local papers ran headlines like "Aldridge Dynasty Crumbles Amid Fraud Scandal." News vans camped outside the estate, their satellite dishes gleaming under the pale winter sun. Strangers whispered when I walked into stores. Some looked at me with pity, others with admiration, a few even with quiet gratitude. I didn't care about any of it. I wasn't doing this for attention. I was doing it because it was right. When my grandfather's trust matured on my 30th birthday, the assets transferred seamlessly into my name, thanks to the ironclad protections James Sullivan had built into the documents decades earlier. $8.2 million. I sat alone in a sterile bank conference room the day it became official, staring at the numbers on the screen. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt heavy. I thought about the people who had trusted my family with their savings, their retirements, their futures, only to be betrayed. And I knew exactly what I had to do. Working with James and Margaret, I established a restitution fund, dedicating a significant portion of the trust to repaying every investor, every contractor, every employee who had been left twisting in the wind. It wasn't enough to erase the damage my family had done, but it was a beginning. A promise that someone, at least, had remembered what integrity meant. At the same time, I founded the Vermont Community Renewal Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to finishing the abandoned projects my family had started, but doing it the right way. Sustainable businesses, affordable housing, ethical practices, real change. The irony wasn't lost on me. The name Aldridge had once been synonymous with greed, deceit, and ruin. Now, piece by piece, I would build something better on the ashes of their empire. It wasn't easy. Contractors were wary. Investors were skeptical. Old wounds bled easily in a town that had been betrayed so thoroughly. But slowly, inch by inch, trust began to rebuild. The first completed project, a modest community center on the site where the doomed lakeside estates had once been planned, opened 6 months after the arrests. I stood there at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, the winter air sharp against my skin, the gathered crowd small but sincere. Children played on the new playground. Seniors laughed over bingo cards inside. Young couples toured the new, affordable housing units. Life, real life, was blooming again in Asbury. Margaret stood beside me, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, a small, proud smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You did good, kid," she said, her voice rough. I swallowed the lump in my throat and simply nodded. For the first time in years, I felt the faint, tentative stirrings of something I thought I had lost forever. Hope. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And somehow, despite everything they had tried to take from me, I had won. 3 months after the arrests, I boarded a flight back to Paris. I sat by the window, watching the patchwork fields of Vermont recede beneath a shroud of clouds, my hands folded tightly in my lap. A simple carry-on sat in the overhead bin, a far cry from the frantic, overloaded suitcase I'd packed the night Chloe called. This time I wasn't fleeing. I was returning. I wasn't the same woman who had left Paris under a cloud of fear and heartbreak. That Sophie had been wounded, trusting, vulnerable. This Sophie, she was something harder, sharper, stronger. When the plane touched down at Charles de Gaulle, the familiar scent of jet fuel and cold mist wrapped around me like an old friend. I stepped onto the tarmac with steady legs, breathing in the crisp air, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Paris hadn't changed, but I had. The first person to greet me was Marion Dubois, my former mentor at the design house. She waited just outside the arrival's gate, chic as ever in a tailored black coat and ankle boots, her silver hair coiled elegantly at the nape of her neck. For a moment I hesitated. Then she smiled that rare, approving smile that had once felt impossibly out of reach, and opened her arms. "Sophie," she said warmly, "welcome back." I stepped into her embrace, and for the first time in what felt like forever, it didn't feel like a lie. Over café au lait and flaky croissants at a small café off Rue Saint-Honoré, Marion outlined her proposal. She was launching a new venture, a sustainable fashion line focused on ethical production and fair labor practices, a rebellion against the excesses and cruelties of the industry she had spent her life mastering. And she wanted me as her partner, not an assistant, not a junior designer, a partner. "You have integrity," she said simply, stirring her coffee. "It's rarer than talent these days, and you have both." The words hit harder than she knew. After everything, the betrayal, the lies, the abandonment, to be seen not as a burden or a bank account, but as a woman of value. It almost broke me. Almost. Instead, I smiled, my hand steady around my cup. "I'd be honored," I said. And just like that, a new chapter began. The months that followed were a whirlwind of sketches, fabric swatches, late-night fittings, and whispered strategy sessions in dimly lit ateliers. The line, Étoile Nouvelle, began to take shape under our careful, passionate hands. A celebration of resilience, of beauty with purpose, of starting over. Sometimes, late at night, I still woke with a jolt, the echoes of old fears rattling my chest. But those moments passed more quickly now, because every morning, when I stepped into the sunlit studio on the left bank, when I watched our team laughing over coffee, when I pinned the final stitches into a dress that would be worn not by mannequins, but by real, living women, I remembered who I had become. Not the daughter of a crumbling dynasty, not the pawn they had tried to use, but Sophie Aldridge, designer, builder, survivor, the woman who had turned betrayal into power, grief into action, and ruin into something that could bloom again. And in the end, maybe that was the most beautiful thing I had ever created. A year later, almost to the day, I found myself standing once again on the familiar cracked sidewalk of Asbury. The town had changed, subtly at first glance, but unmistakably to anyone who knew where to look. The abandoned lots were now bustling community spaces. The unfinished shells of buildings had been transformed into affordable apartments, local shops, and daycare centers. Hope lingered in the air, crisp and tangible. The Vermont Community Renewal Foundation, my foundation, had not only survived, it had flourished. The reason for my return was simple: Today, we were dedicating the Aldridge Memorial Community Garden, ironically on land that had once been earmarked for a luxury condo project my family had never finished. Now, rows of tomatoes, sunflowers, and fresh herbs stretched beneath the spring sun, tended by hands that had once felt abandoned by the very name Aldridge. Standing there, watching children run between raised beds and elderly couples tending seedlings, I felt something shift deep inside me, a kind of peace that no courtroom victory could ever offer. Margaret Langston joined me near the entrance, her sharp eyes softer now, a cane in one hand but pride radiating from every inch of her. "You did it, Sophie," she said simply. I smiled, not the brittle, defensive smile I had worn for so long, but something real, something rooted. "I didn't do it alone," I said. She squeezed my hand. "You started it. That's what matters." After the ribbon cutting, after the speeches and the photographs, after the quiet congratulations from townspeople who had once only whispered about the Aldridge scandal, I wandered alone through the winding paths of the garden. The late afternoon sun bathed everything in gold, the new leaves shimmering in the breeze. And that's when I saw her, Chloe, standing near a bed of marigolds, hands in her pockets, looking small and lost in a way that no designer dress or forced smile could conceal. We locked eyes across the rows of flowers. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Finally, she crossed the distance between us, her steps tentative. "I heard you were back," she said, her voice barely carrying over the breeze. "I didn't come to cause trouble," I replied calmly. "I know." She hesitated, looking down at the soil between us. I wanted to see it. What you built." I didn't answer. I let her speak. "You were right," Chloe said after a long silence. "About all of it. About Dad. About Nathan. About Mom." She twisted her hands together. I didn't want to believe it. I thought if we kept going, if we kept smiling, maybe it would all work out somehow. I watched her, this sister I had once loved, once trusted, who had let me believe Dad was dying just to lure me back into their trap. And yet, standing here now, I didn't feel hatred. I just felt tired. "You were part of it too," I said, my voice steady. "I know," she whispered. For a moment, the only sound was the rustle of leaves and the distant laughter of children. "I'm trying to be better," Chloe said finally. "I'm working with a prison reform group, helping women find jobs after release. It's not much, but it's a start," I said. She looked up then, and for the first time in years I saw my sister, not the mask she had worn for so long. "I'm sorry, Sophie," she said. "For all of it." I nodded once. "Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe someday." Chloe turned and walked away, her figure shrinking against the setting sun. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the scent of earth and new beginnings, until the last light faded from the sky. And for the first time, truly and deeply, I realized I wasn't standing in the ruins of my past anymore. I was standing in the garden of my future. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing in the stark, gray visiting room of the State Women's Correctional Facility. The plastic chairs were bolted to the floor. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A guard nodded for me to sit, then retreated to his post by the door, far enough away to offer privacy, but close enough to remind us both this was no ordinary reunion. I sat, folding my hands in my lap, my heart steady but heavy. A minute later, Meredith Aldridge entered. My mother. She looked older somehow, smaller inside her faded prison uniform, but her back was still straight, her chin still lifted with that brittle pride that had ruled our home for as long as I could remember. She crossed the room and sat across from me, smoothing the legs of her uniform as if it were a designer skirt. Her hands trembled slightly before she clasped them together on the table. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Finally, it was her who broke the silence. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I wasn't sure either," I replied. She gave a soft, humorless chuckle. "I suppose I don't deserve it." I didn't argue. She looked down at her hands, studying the deep grooves and fading polish on her nails. I think about it a lot, she said, quietly. About how we got here. How I let it happen. There was no defensiveness in her voice. No self-justification. Just a hollow weariness that felt more honest than anything I had ever heard from her. I was so afraid, she continued, her voice low. Afraid of losing everything we had built. Afraid of what people would say if they knew we were failing. Afraid of being ordinary. I said nothing. I let her carry the weight of her own words. You were right, she whispered. About all of it. About Dad. About Nathan. About me. She swallowed hard. Especially about me. For a long time, I just watched her. The woman who had spent my childhood drilling into me the importance of appearances, of control, of silence. The woman who had stood by while Dad twisted love into currency. I never hated you, I said, finally, my voice soft. I hated what you let yourself become. Tears filled her eyes then. Quick, unchecked, utterly human. I lost myself a long time ago, she said. I just didn't realize how much until it was too late. The silence between us wasn't hostile anymore. It was sad, heavy with regret. Your grandfather saw something in you that the rest of us were too blind, or too scared, to see, she said. You were always meant for more than this family. I blinked against the sting behind my eyes. She faltered, reaching across the table, but stopping short, as if afraid to overstep. I'm sorry, Sophie. I'm so sorry. There was nothing more to say. No magic words to erase the years of damage. No apology strong enough to rebuild what had been broken. But still, I know, I said quietly. And somehow that was enough. When the guard returned and touched her shoulder, signaling the end of our time, Meredith rose slowly. She hesitated, then gave me a small, tentative nod. Not regal, not commanding, just a mother. As she turned and walked away, I watched her go without anger, without hatred, without chains. Outside, the sun was just beginning to set, casting long, golden shadows across the prison yard. I tilted my face to the fading light, breathing it in like a benediction. The past no longer owned me, and neither did their ghosts. 1 year later, I stood on the rooftop terrace of my Paris flat, the evening breeze tugging at the hem of my linen dress. The city stretched out before me in a tapestry of soft gold and slate blue, the Seine a silver ribbon winding its way through the ancient heart of it all. Below, the hum of life rose faintly, laughter spilling from cafes, the distant strum of a guitar on a street corner, the low rumble of a metro train disappearing into the earth. And above, the sky burned with the last light of the setting sun, streaks of orange and pink smeared across a deepening violet canvas. It was beautiful, wild, untamed, a mirror of the life I had carved out for myself. Inside, my phone buzzed with a new message from Kayla Morgan, now a regular presence in my life, his slow smile and steady presence a balm against all the old scars. Landing at 9. Can't wait to see you. I smiled, slipping the phone back into my pocket. Margaret had sent photos earlier that morning. Pictures of the newest community garden project opening in Asbury. Children with muddy hands and wide grins. Elderly couples planting saplings. The town I had once thought broken beyond repair had found a way to heal, and somehow, so had I. Etoile Nouvelle, our fashion line, had debuted its first collection to quiet acclaim. Nothing flashy, nothing empty, just honest craftsmanship, sustainable beauty, and a stubborn, defiant kind of hope stitched into every seam. And me, I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't fighting to prove anything. I was simply living. The hurt hadn't vanished. Some wounds never fully closed. There were still moments when memories rose up sharp and aching. Dad's betrayal, Mom's coldness, Chloe's tearful call in the middle of the night. Echoes of a life that had almost swallowed me whole. But now, those memories no longer ruled me. They were just part of the story, not the whole of it. I turned my face toward the wind, closing my eyes as the last rays of sunlight kissed my skin. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel heavy. I didn't feel trapped. I felt free. Free to choose. Free to hope. Free to build something beautiful from the wreckage. The clock in the distance chimed 9, the deep notes rippling across the rooftops. I laughed softly under my breath, the sound surprising even myself with its ease, its lightness. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a plane touched down, carrying a future I hadn't dared to imagine a year ago. A future that, finally, was mine to claim. I stepped back inside, closing the terrace door behind me, the cool night air brushing against my shoulders one last time. Tomorrow would be another day, another chance, another beginning, and this time it would be written entirely on my terms. The past was a story already told, but the sky beyond, the sky was wide open,